As I mentioned in the previous review, after Adventure 2's initial release, the Dreamcast would eventually be discontinued. Thus, Sega goes third-party, with Sonic and other subsequent Sega franchises going third-party as well. This leads to the main subject of this review, Sonic Heroes. Sonic Heroes' overall reception is kind of an inverse of the reception gained by the previous two games. While Adventure 1 and 2 have become more decisive over the years, despite being initially beloved at release, Heroes, on the other hand, divisive at release, has become more favored as time went on. Granted, it still has its detractors, but what Sonic game doesn't have its fair share of fans and detractors? So, how good is Sonic Heroes? Well, to start off, let's talk about the presentation. As far as overall graphics and visuals go, this game does look nice. I'd even say it holds up better than most other third-party games that were released around the same time or even after. The environments take up a much more cartoonish and wacky look, as opposed to the adventure games where the environments had that middle ground between wacky and realism. While I may prefer the style of adventure, I still really like running through the colorful and fantastical environments of this game. The set pieces are especially memorable and creative. I mean, look at this island, it's shaped like a whale. That's frickin' cool. And there are other neat little set pieces I can mention, but we would be here all day. Now, I'm usually not one to bring up concept art during a review, but I'm making an exception here. I mean, look at this. This man, it's fucking gorgeous. Now, this one interests me the most. Supposedly, this was gonna be an underwater level, but it ended up getting scrapped. Probably during pre-production. Such a shame because it looked like it would have been so cool. I'd love to see this type of environment come back in a later game. Well, too bad it went into the metaphorical dumpster along with Mighty and Ray. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment. The story is much more simplistic and lighthearted compared to the last two games. This is not inherently a bad thing though. As far as the plot goes, it's basically your typical Stop Eggman sort of story. Only this time, it's with a twist, as... spoiler alert! It's actually Metal Sonic disguised as Eggman, which is certainly different. Nonetheless, all four of the main campaigns have their own motivations in the plot. Team Sonic is trying to save the world from Eggman's scheme, Team Dark is trying to find Eggman's treasure and uncover Shadow's memories, Team Rose is looking for Froggy and a Chow, and Team Chaotix are doing a job for a secret client who is actually the real Dr. Eggman. Despite how different each of these goals are, each of their end objectives end up being the same, which makes sense considering they do, in the end, team up to fight the true final boss. As is, there isn't too much plot outside of the pre-rendered cutscenes. Well, there is a lot of dialogue during the levels, so yeah, but there is something I do want to bring up. So, Shadow's in this game? Originally he wasn't going to be in this game though. I do find it interesting how certain things changed during this game's development, like how Ray, Mighty, Chaos, and Metal Sonic were all going to be playable characters. Then they all got scrapped. Though Metal Sonic still ended up being the game's main villain, I don't necessarily think Shadow had anything to do with this change, but most likely his, along with Omega's inclusion, probably had a role to play in this. And honestly, that was for the best, because we wouldn't have gotten Team Dark otherwise. Oh, and Rouge was gonna be paired with Amy and Cream. Like, what? How would that even work? Who would even be the power character in that scenario? Wait a second, you're telling me Cream would have been the power character? How would that work? She doesn't even look that— Holy shit! Oh god, oh fuck, how is she so overpowered? Ah! Oh, sorry about that. Anyways, Team Dark is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite trios in the series. Seriously, I just really like the chemistry between these three. I mean, you have the stoic, enigmatic, cool black and red hedgehog with a troubled past, the determined, clever, flirty Bat, who also has a bit of a caring side, and then you have Omega, who is practically a war machine angered by being neglected for so long, yet somehow finds friendship in Shadow and Rouge. Yeah, they really managed to make all three of these characters fit with each other, and not only are they portrayed as good partners to each other, but also as good pals. I particularly like the chemistry with Shadow and Rouge. It was great in SA2, and it's especially strong in this game. We're shown that Rouge actually cares for Shadow. During the one scene in the midway point of Team Dark's story, where Shadow sees the android that resembles him and questions if he's even real. Or how, during the ending, Rouge finds those capsules of Shadow clones, coming to the conclusion that the real Shadow is probably dead. But then Omega comforts her, claiming that the real Shadow must still be around, giving her that bit of hope, showing us that, well, she basically cares about Shadow and his well-being. Also, I really like this exchange Rouge and Shadow have at the end.
Something's never changed.
What are you saying? What else is that famous president supposed to do?
Omega is also pretty awesome. Granted, he's no Gamma, but he does have his fair share of death. Now, in my previous review, I made this statement. The story ends with his sacrifice for the greater good, and yeah, Shadow's arc in this game is great. And it's a complete one too. It would have been perfect if he were to have stayed dead here. Now, I did say it would have been perfect, but I never stated he should have stayed dead. In fact, bringing him back definitely would not be an issue so long as they managed to give him a compelling arc. And they give him an arc that spans across 2 games. That said, Hero gives it a pretty decent start. One thing that does kind of bother me, however, is how barely anyone questions why Shadow is even alive. Like, Sonic, for example, saw him fall to his death, and then goes on to have that dramatic dialogue about how Shadow was this great guy, ending off with him saying, "Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog," in a rather sentimental tone. Yet, we don't see him surprised, we don't see him question it, he just acts like nothing at all happened. Look, I'm not asking for some big dramatic reaction from Sonic, I'm just asking for him to show a little bit of surprisement. Is surprisement even a word? You know, continuity. Now, granted, in the following level they do joke about how this could be the ghost of Shadow, so at least there is some sort of acknowledgement. Aside from all that stuff relating to Shadow and Team Dark, most of Sonic Heroes' plot is basically paper thin, and doesn't have much in the way of character development and depth. And coming off of Adventure 2, that's kind of unfortunate. At best, though, it is pretty serviceable. But at worst, it's kinda lackluster, which is especially disappointing considering this game was supposed to be the big return of Metal Sonic, though his inclusion is still fantastic nonetheless. However, it's far from a bad narrative, and I'd definitely take it over the schlock they call storytelling in 2010's era of Sonic. Trust me, when we get to that, oh boy, I'm not holding back. There is still that overall sense of engagement, wonderment, and mystery, and overall genuineness. The writing is mostly alright, although a bit cheesy in certain areas. As I mentioned before, there is a good amount of dialogue during the levels. A lot of it is tutorial-oriented dialogue, which may seem annoying to some people, but I also do kinda see it fitting with the whole theme of teamwork this game goes out for. We do get a lot of dialogue that is the characters bantering back and forth, giving their opinions on the current situation, or the level, reacting to crazy scenarios, and other stuff like that. This type of stuff gives good insight into the characters and their personalities, and I really do like that. Sonic Heroes would be marked as the final console game utilizing the Adventure voice cast. And on that note, the voice acting is great. One thing to note is that this would be one of Dean Bristow's last performances, as 2 years after this game's release, he would unfortunately pass away. Though he may be gone, his legacy will always live on with his excellent portrayal of Dr. Eggman, as well as his many other roles. His performance here is great as always. The rest of the cast is pretty great, aside from the one kid that voices Tails, but he was just a kid, so I'll give him a pass. The Adventure cast just has this energy to them that I really appreciate, especially Ryan Drummond. He does Sonic's voice justice. The next couple of games afterwards would replace this cast with the cast from the 4 kids of Sonic X, and this would entail a lot of controversy from the fanbase. That's something I'll go into more detail with my Shadow review, That said, the Adventure Cast pretty much got it dirty from Sega. I mean, firing them and not even telling them until it was too late? That's kinda fucked, man. Ryan in particular was pissed. You could tell he is still, to this day, very passionate about his role as Sonic.
Are you planning a new thwarting of any of Eggman's plans or any of that?
Always planning thwarting. See, that's the secret to life. You always gotta have a thwart on the side. Always plan your next thwart. That's from me to you, free of charge.
He almost reprised his role as Sonic in Generations, but that's a tale we'll have to get into later. With that said, for a last console go-around, it was a pretty great way to go out. The soundtrack is really great. Some of the best to come out of the adventure era. The different variety of music, just the way they fit with the environments. If you respect your ears at all, then I'd really recommend listening to some of this stuff. In fact, why don't we just take a moment to appreciate the soundtrack? Sonic Heroes takes a little bit of a different approach to gameplay with the brand new team mechanic. On the fly, you can switch between a speed character that goes fast, a flight character that makes platforming easier and allows you to reach higher areas, and a power character that's built most for ground combat and breaking through destructible areas. One thing to immediately note is that certain abilities like Sonic's Spin Dash and Knuckles' Glide have been omitted and compromised with lesser versions of those moves. Understandable, as this is done to comply with other characters. One issue I do kinda have though is that most, if not almost all, of the abilities in this game are pretty situational, as opposed to having moves that make traversal more interesting and technical. Thing is, however, this game's stylistic and artistic goal isn't quite the same as past games. It's more action-oriented, and with that in mind, this game is certainly more combat-oriented than previous games, if not a little bit too indulgent about it. It's clear that they put a lot of thought into the combat of this game, and having certain enemies require that you utilize certain team formations as well as the whole level-up system. I do have to appreciate the level of strategy and crowd control in certain combat situations. That said, I do feel it goes a bit overboard with it, especially in later stages, and it can be a bit of a drag, especially if you're underpowered. But at least this game implements the combat better than certain other games. That said, the physics and collision detection do have times where they are problematic. Now, I have gotten used to the slippery controls, but that's not to say I didn't have times where I slipped off of the stage geometry and other aggravating situations like that. As far as the physics go, while it's fine for the most part, you do have stage gimmicks like the pinball sections and Casino Park that, while they are a neat concept, in execution are annoying because they're reliant on the physics that don't entirely work that great with this particular mechanic. Then you have Rail Canyon, which is the worst level in the game. Why is that? Because rail grinding sucks in this game. Not only are the mechanics nerfed to all hell, but the rail switching is just as finicky, if not even worse. It's just a shame because the stage has some neat set pieces. Anyways, putting the negatives aside, this game has some pretty great levels. Seaside Hill and Great Metropolis have this great pace to them, and all the platforming and occasional split pathways go on to help with that. And while the game does go through a bit of a rough patch with Casino Park and Rail Canyon, the levels that follow after are great. They gradually build off of the team mechanics in fun ways, and also include creative mechanics of their own, like giant frogs that cause the level to rain and morph the level geometry in Frog Forest, or the switches in Hang Castle that affect the gravity, change the pathway, as well as other paranormal-inspired level gimmicks. Oh, and on the subject of Hang Castle, I have to bring up this one Lightspeed trail. As a sucker for good creative cinematography, this really satisfies me. Or how about an egg fleet, jumping from and blowing up ship to ship in an ever so stylish manner. The overall spectacle of this game is something to admire, and with how creative, colorful, and fun this game is, it's easy to see why many Sonic fans say this is their favorite Sonic game. That said, I do have one major issue with this game that kinda drags it down for me. That being the requirements for getting to the final story. Just like Sonic Adventure, you're required to complete all the stories. However, this time around, you also want to collect all the Chaos Emeralds in the special stages. Now, I'm just gonna get straight to the point on why the system sucks here in particular. You see, with Sonic Adventure, while you did revisit environments quite a bit, it was always unique with each character, as each character actually opened up the parts of the environments that others couldn't. Here, however, each of the campaigns are mostly the same. You go through the same assortment of levels, in the same exact order. You're basically having to beat the game 4 times. Oh great! I beat the game! Now I have to do it again! And again! And again!
And again! And again!
It gets very repetitive, and no, changing the difficulty and slightly tweaking the level design and enemy placement isn't gonna cut it. Couldn't they have at least changed the level ordering in each campaign? That would have at least improved it a little. But you may ask, what about Team Chaotix? They're the unique ones out of the 4 campaigns. Well, yes, they are the unique ones. But ironically enough, they have the worst campaign out of the 4. Their stages have a mission structure. The missions, however, mostly equate to shitty fetch quests. Let me rephrase that. Shitty fetch quests in a linear level structure. They don't even bother to give us a radar like in the treasure hunting stages of the Sonic Adventure games. That would have made these a hell of a lot more tolerable. Man, when I play a Sonic game, one thing I totally want to do is blow out torches. That's fun, right? Oh, and their horde battle in Hang Castle, easily the worst in the game. But oh, the special stages. Now, these are a special kind of hell. For one, even getting to the special stages is an ordeal in of itself. In order to get to the special stage, you need to obtain a key, and you need to hold on to said key until you reach the end of the goal. Sounds simple, right? But if you get hit once, you lose it. Now, making simply not dying at all would have been a much more fair, but not even getting hit? Geez, these stages are long. How can you expect someone to not get hit? That is unless they're skilled, I guess. But the special stages themselves are The main issue with the special stages is just how awful the physics and controls are. Movement is so fucking jerky, and it's so easy to get thrown out of place. It's just a mess. I at least have to give them some credit for attempting to bring the special stages into a 3D Sonic game. But that doesn't make this any less egregious, and I wouldn't be so mad at any of these special stages if they were optional. But I guess that would have made them pointless since Supersonic isn't playable outside of the final boss. Last thing I want to talk about are the boss fights. There are 3 types of bosses in the main game that have 2 or 3 variations. First, you have the Eggman fights, which are pretty decent for the most part. The design of these fights kinda harken back to the classic Sonic style of boss design, with an emphasis on taking offensive measures and punching the box's openings. The Egg Emperor is entirely based around this concept, and that particular fight is probably one of my favorite 3D Sonic bosses. The entire tone of the fight is just so fucking raw. It used to be so brutal when I was a kid, but nowadays I just focus on leveling up my fight and power characters. Man, I wish the other bosses were like this, because the other boss types just suck. The team battles are just a mess. Simply switch to flight formation, spam Thundershoot, and the fight is over as soon as it begins. The mob fights shouldn't even be considered boss fights. You're practically just fighting the regular enemies you fight in the regular levels. This is even worse than the team battles. At least those were something. As for the final boss though, it's pretty epic. Sure, the way you fight him is kind of but the atmosphere of the fight, the sheer scale of his attacks, even having a neat little desperation move near the end, and the music really makes it climactic. Oh, and on the subject of the song itself, What I'm Made Of, yet another banger from Crush 40, really ties into Metal Sonic's character and his development of breaking away from Eggman's control and basically becoming his own overlord. But alas, he is eventually defeated. And that's Sonic Heroes. Truth be told, while I do find many issues with this game, including the forced repetition, the occasional technical hiccups, and some design choices, I still have positives to point out. While it may not be as strong as the previous 2 3D Sonic titles I reviewed, I still have a lot of fun with it, and that's not to say this game doesn't have some depth at its overall core, as in many ways it clearly does. It's creative, fun, and overall really solid. That said, while the general consensus for Sonic up to this point is mostly pretty positive, the next game to follow after would kinda change that in a particular way. As next time on the Sonic Retrospective, we'll be taking a look at the oddball of the series featuring the guy Classic Pierce loved to hate, Shadow the Hedgehog. Until then, I will see you all later.